Right, so I'm now recording, so let's kick the call off. So welcome everyone to our weekly call. So as we were just discussing, certainly in the UK, it's a lovely spring afternoon for the still the beginning of April, which is marvellous. Certainly always seems that much better when the sun is shining. Unless I suppose you're thirsty in the middle of a desert, in which case maybe not so much. But anyway, okay, just reminder of the plans for the call. The sort of main sort of focus for discussion today will be an update on DELEG with at least one of the sort of co-authors of one of the current DELEG drafts. So Ralph definitely is on the call, and we'll see if Tal joins us in due course or not. But I guess we've got the senior co-author, Ralph. Is the way we should look at it, which is the important thing.
No, we're all equal.
And then sort of depending on how we get on time-wise, there's a few interesting things from the last week or so which we'll touch on, and I'll just remind you some sort of future topics as well. So it'd be a fairly informal discussion, I think, on the DELEG update. But without further ado, let me
So
stop.
one thing I want to ask, actually, I mean, we unfortunately IETF still couldn't decide which of the two competing drafts are there. I mean, did you also invite Philip or Willem? Because I mean, I have my side of the story to tell, but in all of fairness, it probably would be good to have someone
Yeah, I
from the
thought Willem
competing.
was going to show up, but he just said that he's tied up right now.
Oh, well, we have you.
Yeah, but I was kind of tied up last week, so I'm trying to, yeah, I can, you know, so not
Uh,
as admirable as Willem, but yes.
you're sort of very welcome to join the discussion. But I suppose what I should put, perhaps in terms of ground rules, then, just to emphasise, or maybe context setting as much as anything, for anyone that's not following the machinations of the DELEG working group closely. Then there is a sort of current process that the co-chairs are taking us through, which is really the sort of final steps from the last two working group meetings, which is essentially to try and get clarity on which of two competing is maybe not the right word, but two alternative drafts for the base protocol to adopt to form the foundation for future work. And the deadline for responses for that is tomorrow, I think. So anyone that hasn't responded on the DELEG working group mailing list, you still have a little time to do that. And I'll put a link in case you don't have it to hand to the relevant email from the co-chairs afterwards. So what prompted this discussion, which we scheduled certainly before the last IETF meeting, I can't remember exactly when, but possibly early March, was really we'd had the sort of panel discussion way back last May, and before then, probably a couple of months prior, that Tail had been scheduled to come on just to introduce DELEG shortly after the relevant IETF hackathon, but was unavoidably detained at the last minute. So Ralph kindly stepped in and used Tal's slides, and I think did an excellent job, Ralph, zero notice to manage that. So really, this was just, as I say, it was scheduled pre the last ITF working group, and was just an opportunity to talk about some perceptions on where things currently were. So without necessarily getting too much into the weeds of some of the discussions on the pros and cons of the various drafts, but more just sort of a personal view of where you think things are, and so yeah, where they might progress in the future. So you don't need to be overly constrained by the specifics of the working group, but perhaps more generally about how things are headed. So we'll keep this fairly informal in that sense, which hopefully will make things a little easier to sort of share personal views on that.
Yeah, I also don't have slides. So,
Well, nobody has slides. Oh, I
If you
thought
did,
you guys had a new version too, Ralph, but you don't.
no, I mean, we did the last version before the IETF and
Yeah.
haven't done a new version after that.
Well, no, because you can't find tail. I know how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think to maybe set or give a base kind of understanding, and Tim can correct me if I'm saying something wrong. The DELEG working group kind of was formed a couple of IETFs ago to kind of look into how to modernize DNS delegations. And because the current way is kind of like not very extensible, and we want to have a protocol that is extensible. And Tim also, I think, and Tail both are authors of requirements draft. And after that requirements draft, there were two kind of drafts submitted for the working group. They are, I think, similar in a lot of sense, and they might even become similar, although that's not totally so. But the basis is that the parent uses a special kind of SVCP type record that is extensible and allows you to add more information on where to find the service for the child. The let's call it DELEG draft, I think that's what that I'm a co-author of, just uses a type that will be authoritative at the parent. And that type is called DELEG. And from there, pretty much everything flows as it is with NS now, which I think makes it simple to understand. The IDELEG draft, as I think it's called, uses a different part of the DNS tree to do that. So the delegation is not under, so the delegation example for example.com is not under com, it's under _deleg.com. And that's the main difference between these two drafts.
Yeah. Yep, and Philip pushed out a new version Friday that I think they basically dropped the incremental part name, part wording, and kind of cleaned up some stuff, right? But
Yeah.
yes. Idea being, applications, I know people say DNS is DNS, but DNS is also like an application. The browser people kind of showed us that a few years ago, right? Like, it's just an application to them. And that's where we kind of went with the off branch naming thing, which I do understand the issues with, right? Sort of being out of path kind of thing. So I get that. But yes, our things have sort of moved closer and closer, right? As what you said. So if you haven't looked at the latest diffs from Friday, you may want to give it a shout.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read it, sorry. I mean, but yeah, I think the kind of overall sentiment is sort of the same. I mean, one uses purely a type,
Yeah.
and makes sure, and there was also, I mean, it is okay to have stuff authoritative in the parent, whereas the other one uses a separate tree, which sort of is not in the parent, but somehow is, which of course doesn't make a change that, well, it's on the side, so it's not in the parent, neither in the child, which kind of
Yeah,
it
gets
has
it out of
different
the path.
semantics on DNS when you ask parent-child relationships.
It does get it out of the path, right? And you're right. The big mess we've had with zone stuff has been the parent-child relationship over the last like 20 years, right? I think we've gotten it cleaned up. I think my concern was, our concern was, is it going to come back again, right, and bite us? But you're right. It is sort of out of path, but it also makes it standalone in such a way that it's obvious, at least visually, it's a DELEG type, you've got a DELEG type zone. Um, so, but yes, looking at that. But the records are basically the same. I think they're kind of, he changed it to service.
No, no, I mean, it was
Oh,
idyllic. I mean,
interesting.
there's a record. It's a record type. It was initially service binding in the first draft, but I think that has been
But he
changed.
changed, oh, that's interesting. They changed it back to service B from DELEG. That's weird. I did not know they were doing that.
I
Okay.
see Willem has sort of joined, so might wish to. That might be a good opportunity to interject, Willem, if you
I
want.
do think the DELEG type is better than service B.
So no, we didn't switch back to Service B. We switched to a different type to be able to mix alias mode and service mode,
Ah,
and also to have multiple alias mode
It is.
records as delegation information,
there it is. Okay. Yeah.
which Ralph also noticed and
Yeah.
mentioned in his email. Yeah.
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 Uh,
I'm sorry. I was
that's-
going through the diff and I was like, wait, service B showed up.
Yeah. So also with respect to side path or on path, I think we view IDELEG as delegation information in the parent zone that will be returned in referral responses in the authority section, just like DELEG does. Only it's not using the name to which is delegated, but a special place for that delegation information. And that's the only difference. But having that information at a different spot makes it also queryable with legacy software and for step resolvers, etc. And there's also, if your authoritative server does not support it, returning this delegation information in the authority section, then the resolver can fall back and ask for it directly. So
Yeah, that is understood, and that's what I kind of like have my guts with, because the resolvers are awfully complex, and I want to make sure that everything that we do going forward doesn't make them more complex, because it will. My view, and I mean, I differ with you, and that is that we haven't changed this stuff for 30 years or so. If we now make a clear cut, we of course have to make everything kind of the legacy world still behave, and I believe both drafts do that. For all the new stuff, we can come up with whatever we are creative with, and we also can require that certain parts of the DNS systems are kind of, if they want to support a new protocol, they all have to be on that side. That's my personal view. I'm not viewing the incremental as a goal for this change. That's just different opinion.
I think we hand waved too much in the past, and I like the fact that if we do this now, everything's sharp, right? All the edges are very, very clearly defined, right? We don't kind of get hand wavy with zone stuff and things like that. Yeah, and I think everybody agrees on that.
Since we got sort of both sets of authors represented, which is fantastic. A question for you then. And this is intended to be positive, so if hopefully it come across that way. It seems as if there's quite a lot of convergence between the two drafts. So whilst there are some differences, clearly, otherwise it will be a really dull conversation. These are quite narrow now, which the impression I have, and disagree as you see fit, is therefore, assuming the co-chairs make a decision to adopt one or other of the drafts as the basis for future work, the fact that they've converged is really good, because it should make it much easier to, where appropriate, if there are some elements of the other draft to amalgamate, that should be a lot simpler. And it should make future working easier. for the whole group rather than for the sort of two sets of authors. I'm curious what your views are, whether you think that's wildly optimistic or if you think that's a reasonable assessment of where we are.
So if I can go first. So indeed, I think what we did. So in our initial draft, we were still using the Service B record indeed, but there's a technical reason to switch to a different type, namely that you can then change what's possible with the type, like mix service and alias mode and have multiple alias modes. So that was the reason to do that. And then the other thing, in our latest iteration of the draft, we reordered the narrative. So initially, our narrative was focused on you can do with only a resolver, and everything just works with just a resolver implementation. And this is true, and it's still true, but we changed the focus to, you know, to what it looks like if a resolver gets a referral response now. So we changed the story to talk about the conventional way resolvers learn about delegations first, and then tell what a resolver should do if it doesn't get the DELEG referral, so to say, a second. And in our first version, so we introducing a bit of latency in the narrative because it's now a fallback strategy. And initially, in our first version, we did everything at once. So there would not be a fallback. It would be, you would not have an extra round trip time, so to say. And in the last subsection of the section that talks about fallback, we also introduced the way, well, you can do this also immediately on the first query, and then you have the same performance, so to say, round trip wise as the first version. But I think it's very clear there's just one single aspect which is different from the two drafts, and that's where the delegation information is. Is it on the name to which the parent zone is delegating, or is it somewhere else? So we put it somewhere else because we think that the name to which the zone is delegating is to um, the party to which the zone is delegated. It's owned by that party, and that's also the concept of DNS from application perspective. So we're trying to move it more in that domain and put some more or equalize that, so to say. Make it more the same as other application usage of DNS, and that has certain advantages. Like it works with legacy software, and you can look up those things from the step and all that sort of kind of things.
So I don't know, Ralph or Tal, whether you'd agree again that was
Well, I mean, so I'm sort of happy that the type and the optimization that we had in DELEG initially are also now in the other draft. I'm happy about that. The thing I have problems with is fallbacks, because we've been, especially, I mean, there has been a couple of DNS flag days now, and all of the and when you look at the history of DNS and all the problems that were caused with CVEs and what have you, most of them were caused by the absurdly complex logic that is in the resolver and the fallback mechanism we had in there. So that's why my personal view is I don't want to go into a new protocol work and already have fallbacks, because that's just seems seems wrong to me. And also the application usage for me, and I really, I mean, it came to me after when thinking about it over the last couple of days. The underscore stuff where you put stuff on a different part of the trees. There are applications using that, and it's a good thing that applications are using that. However, it's not as common. And when you look at stuff like HTTPS or RFC 9460, the stuff that is used most widely, HTTPS, doesn't use the app because I know it is good for machines and for, I mean, like when you do these certificate roles to understand and look up. But this is stuff that eventually people have to debug. And people are not as good in understanding it. And the DNS, as it is taught now, and as it, I think it has been very successful as a distributed database, is kind of like a single tree structure and not something on the side. That's still, I mean, I agree with Willem. That's the kind of the main difference between the two drafts.
But that's good, I think, that we're now down to one or two, well, it's probably over simplistic, but a relatively small number of differences, which hopefully then will make it simpler for decision making. And then we can still, so again, disagree with me if you think this is wrong. There's still an opportunity to then cherry pick the best bits of both drafts, irrespective of the path forward, so that there isn't a lot of wasted work getting us to here. That we can amalgamate things rather than just say, well, whichever one's chosen, everything else is abandoned. Thanks for your time. and Tim or Tao, feel free to jump in as well if you wish.
Oh no, yeah, and I understand what Ralph's saying about the sort of the underscore stuff, and having worked on the sort of the DMARC stuff, especially with Levine and Kitterman and stuff. Those app people kind of definitely understand how to code that all up, I guess is a good way to put it. But you're right. People have to people do get involved in sort of dealing with that, right? So that is I wonder how that, but a lot of those are sort of defined, I think, built because they expect applications or tools to sort of manage those, right? Rather than people.
Yeah, I like to come back to that as well. So with the Homburg draft or our proposal, the IDELEG proposal, the DNS is also a tree. It's still a tree.
Yeah.
Everything delegates just as before, from the root to .org or to example.org. Only the information for that delegation is not on the same name as the name to which is delegated. That's the only difference. And it's also a bit easier to understand for debugging purposes, for example, if the delegation information is at the parent side of the zone cut, then you have to know the IP addresses of the name servers, the authoritative name servers serving the parent to be able to query for that information. And so if it's just on a different place in the parent zone, so to say, you can just query for it without knowing the IP address of the authoritative service. It's all consequences from this simple switch to putting the delegation information not at the parent side of the zone cut. It enables a lot of regular or things that we are familiar with in DNS.
One of the things that I think came up in the last working group, so I'll paraphrase it and then any of you can respond, or equally anyone else on the call, this might be an opportunity to come in as well, was the hypothetical, the 3 a.m. call to the support desk, and whether one or other of the methodologies was easier to for sort of operational sort of people to understand and intervene with, which I think in the mailing list was interpreted as making a case for the status quo, which I think was not correct. I think it was more a case of are either of the sort of proposals simpler to educate people about, for that, inevitably early hours of the morning phone call because something's broken, and someone who's maybe not in the IETF and fully au fait with the finer workings of DNS needs to get it fixed. So that's a very subjective point of view, but I'm interested, as I say, also from anyone else on the call who has sort of operational responsibility to jump in if you have any thoughts on that as well. But feel free, any of the sort of co-authors who have an opinion on that, sort of happy to take your point of view as well. And people put things in the chat or unmute if you want to join in.
I mean, again, I think one of the kind of differences in kind of how Willem and I see DNS is that my view on DNS always was kind of delegation happens in the parent, and the child has sort of no say. The child must at one point tell the parent where to find its server, but then the parent has to point it, and all the kind of ideas on finding something on the site or in the child or something have caused complexity that we are still suffering in the current DNS from. And this clear cut, in my point of view, is a good opportunity to kind of make that clear. Delegation happens in the parent to the child, and then the child, of course, serves records. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I think that's easier to understand for the 3AM call, but I mean, other people have other opinions. That's fine.
This is definitely subjective. I don't think we can have an objective view of this, but yeah, Willem, please.
Yes, actually, I completely agree. Delegation information should be in the parent zone, the zone that is delegating. That is where the delegation information should be. Just not on the same name as the zone to which is delegated.
Anyone else? I'm just glancing down the list of attendees. I'm not sure if anyone has current operational responsibility. I'm trying to remember who it was that raised this point. I think it was Carl from Nominet. So coming at it from a registry point of view, but
it was me, Andrew. As I often raise this point, when anything ever becomes too complicated for people to understand, I try to crack the whip of KISS. And I don't think I can't give you a strong opinion on whether I think one of these drafts is better for this than the other, because I haven't read them enough to have that opinion. But I do think that I'm more concerned, rather than the 3AM support desk, I'm more concerned about having a team of engineers where I regularly get new people into the team and have to explain how DNS works to them. And therefore we need to keep this as simple as possible to be able to do that. It's difficult enough getting people interested in this to start off with without explaining really, really difficult concepts to them.
fair enough.
Yeah, and I will say operation, and I think people see it in different ways, right? But I get what Carl's saying, and I know what Rory was saying with all the TLD sort of stuff, right? I look at stuff at a more SLD level, right? And operating large amounts of zones with a bunch of weird data sort of stuff, right? How to debug funky CPE devices with bad, DNS mask hacks built into them, right?
Fair point, Tim. Yeah, as you say, quite rightly, different types of
Or Windows Windows DNS, right?
And to be clear, I don't mean for a minute that we need to dumb things down to the point of them being useless.
No.
If we decide that the right thing is that something has to be complicated, then that might be the best way forward. Just need to make sure it's documented in a way that can be easily explained to people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, we are doing this sort of in both drafts by adding a complication that the delegation now is done with an extensible record. And that extensible record can have more information than just the name, which we have with NS.
Yeah.
So there is some complication, but I think this is similar for both drafts.
Yeah, I mean, I think adding that additional information is important. I don't know about the going off the side and like Brett had said, I haven't read these in detail, but to me, falling in line with kind of how things have been done in some ways makes some sense, just because unfortunately I run across people all the time that really don't understand how DNS works and are responsible for running DNS. It's all too common. So putting it in the same zone where you can't miss it, it to me makes some sense. But I think the best point is, as long as it's documented appropriately, that's really the key.
Yes, so I don't think we have two different approaches here. Both the DELEG and IDELEG put the delegation information in the parent zone. It's just that IDELEG has, so you have a zone, for example, .org, and you want to put a delegation there. Then with IDELEG, you put it in this special place in the zone where all the delegation information goes.
Yeah, just like the DMARC records are. I get what you're saying, yeah. No, like I said, I can see the benefits of both of it. I think whatever it is, as long as it's obvious, is kind of the key thing. And I definitely agree with both of you that having this extensible information in there is going to make things a lot easier in the future as a whole.
Yeah.
Anyone else, again, accepting that perhaps many won't have read the two drafts closely, but does anyone else have any opinions or comments that you would like to share at the moment? Give you a chance to unmute if you're able to, or pop something in the chat if that's not convenient, and share your thoughts. As I say, I will share a link to the relevant request from the co-chairs on the mailing list to also add your thoughts on the DELEG mailing list, so that they can help when assessing which of the drafts to adopt, assuming they make a decision. I suppose the worst outcome is
I think the worst outcome is that we already have two IDFs, and I mean, hopefully we'll have a decision by Madrid or at least until Montreal. Because we need to go forward.
Sooner than that. I think I told Brian we should have it sooner than that, but
yeah,
because the deadline is tomorrow for
the comments to the mailing list. There's nothing that says that the chairs will do a decision the day after that, and I don't think that will be the case. Knowing Brian and Dwayne.
I know how to get Brian to do stuff, so maybe I'll just start bugging him.
Well, as a sort of personal view, I think a decision well in advance of Madrid would be beneficial for the working group.
Yeah.
For whatever it is.
And my only suggestion to Ralph was I spent a lot of time playing with Willem's test bed, and I kind of do hope that you guys can sort of throw something together out there in the world that people can bang on, right?
Yeah.
And I would make Tail do that, but that's just me.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I'm sort of the stucky with that, and given that you see I'm in a hotel, I'm actually on vacation, so that's why after the IETF, I haven't been too much on mailing lists and doing stuff. So, but it is something that will come, and if not kind of fully public, I can certainly get you and William and whoever's interested into that once it's done. Hopefully, sometime this month.
Feels his name was used in vain. I don't know, Taylor, if you wanted to if you can unmute and wanted to comment, you're welcome.
I was late to this meeting because I had an ICANN meeting this morning. Tim is unduly optimistic about the amount of time I have available.
No. I know how much time you have available. So that was your mistake. So
okay, I'm sort of keeping an eye on the time. Any last thoughts from any of the four of you?
no, I think, while some people may think there's a bunch of conflict, I think everybody's done very well at sort of sorting this stuff out, right? That's all I had to say. But
Yeah, I think we're all very well behaved people trying to argue on kind of course, technical grounds, but with different opinions.
yeah.
Yes. So I would like to add, so I also would like that a decision is made so we can continue with, whatever this decision will be. But I also think it should be evaluated carefully. We had some feedback of people that think that the query increase will be too much. So I think, if there would be time to do an evaluation or analysis of how much increase that would be worthwhile as input to make a decision, I think. I also want to remark that we do have also the DELEG implemented in NSD. And it's just available. There's a pull request on NSD GitHub repository. And you can just, compile it and use it to serve DELEG records. So there's a pull request for iDeleg and one for DELEG. And also for the LDNS toolset, by the way, if you want to, there's a branch called iDeleg and DELEG, and it can sign both DELEG and iDeleg and query for the types and show them, even with the IPv4 hints translated into glue, etc.
Well, they're just on the presentation, not on the.
No, it's in the draft.
Yeah, it's in the draft, but the glue is just the presentation format. It's not the wire format.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it has all those changes to the LDNS.
Yes.
So if you want to play with it now, you can do that, and that's also the software that's used to implement that testbed that we have.
William, are you able to share a link with me after the call, and I'll just share that more widely?
Yes, it's deleg.org or iDeleg.net.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. I just see that in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, there you are. There's an opportunity for anyone to take a look.
It has all the links to all the software and also the IP addresses of the servers that are already running the zones, serving iDeleg and DELEG.
Brilliant. Well, that feels like an optimistic, a positive thing rather to finish on. Hopefully by the time, I'm assuming that the working group will meet in Madrid. Who knows, but it'd be good if certainly by then we have clarity on the way forward. Accepting your point, William, that it needs to be an informed decision.
Yes. Informed decision, yes, well considered by everybody.
Yeah, but it'd be good if after Madrid, move forward with a sort of integrated approach, which I think will be really positive. But okay, well, look, let's pause there. I hope that was useful to people. It will encourage a few people on the call that haven't had a chance to do so to take a look at the two drafts. As I say, I'll try and get the recording up this evening with a link to the relevant email from the co-chairs. So if you've not expressed an opinion and wish to do so before presumably end of tomorrow, you put something onto the DELEG mailing list with your point of view. If you have a preference, you may not, but if you do, I think the co-chairs would certainly appreciate that. And also, I think the two questions were whether there are any technical reasons to prefer either of the two proposals, as well as what your preference is. So I think they're particularly welcome any clarity of technical rationale behind your preference. Okay, well, thank you for that discussion. I hope that was useful for people, and look forward with interest to see what decision our glorious co-chairs make. But then that's why they get the big bucks for being the co-chairs of the working group. Okay, let me then just move on. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to share a few things from the last week or so, just to completely change the focus of the call for a while, away from the delights of DELEG and IDELEG, with a few things that have happened in the news over the last roughly the last week. And as always, I won't go through all of the things from the weekly headlines email. I'll just call out a few of the ones I thought were particularly interesting, starting with the fast flux advisory from CISA and partners on, I think it was last Thursday, highlighting some recommended mitigations for this malware, which included DNS and IP blocking. There's quite a lot of coverage for it, and if you've not seen it, the registry, register rather, had by far the best headline in my view. Something like "What the Flux," I think, was the gist of it, something along those lines. But yeah, well worth a look. And kudos, you'll see the second bullet point down. Renee Burton of sort of VP of Threat Intel at Infoblox was quoted in dark reading as basically saying, if your protective DNS provider doesn't know already what fast flux is and how to mitigate the threat, find a new provider, which I thought was quite a punchy response. And in fairness, in the accompanying Infoblox blog post, she did sort of reference back to some of the prior work that had been done on fast flux from, I think, earlier last year, if I recall. So, as I say, quite a lot of coverage on that in the press back end of last week. There was also the RIPE DNS working group has got a call for nominations for the one of the co-chairs. So one of the co-chairs is stepping down imminently. So they're inviting either volunteers to put themselves forward or for people to nominate a potential co-chair for the group. So do bear that in mind. And also, just at the bottom of the screen, talking of the DNS working group at RIPE, there was a prompt from the co-chairs for any presentations that people wanted to give during the RIPE 90 meeting in Lisbon. The agenda, I don't think it's been finalised yet, but the working group will probably meet on the morning of the 14th of May. Usually has, I think it's either 90 minutes or 2 hours in total. So they usually give, I think it's about a 20-minute slot for individual presentations. Put out a call for sort of further proposals for content, which could be delivered either in person or remotely. So just to highlight that in case you've not come across it. And then last one I call out, top of the screen, was a plug from PIR, which was just highlighting that there are tools for finding and reporting DNS abuse provided by the Net Beacon Institute, which I think is the renamed DNS Abuse Institute. I think just renamed, rebranded, but just to highlight that they do have tools for that purpose. As you can see, plenty of other things are happening. Also, just other less directly DNS related stuff. There's quite a few things in the press. I won't go through all of those, but amongst others, there's the European Commission has launched a call for tenders for a 5 million euro sort of funding to strengthen European fact-checking, or to strengthen the European fact-checking network more specifically. So they're running a tender exercise at the moment, which concludes in September. So that may be of interest to anyone. Also, be remiss not to mention tariffs, given all the news coverage over the last few days, and suggestions to that the EU should target big tech. I've seen more coverage on that today, actually, as part of the sort of response to the sort of tariffs. Yeah, that's probably sufficient, I think, from those. There's sort of, I'd say, no shortage of news this week. RIPE 90. Not that far away, as we said earlier, sort of middle of May, so about roughly 6 weeks away. The sort of final call for presentations closes tomorrow, so if you haven't submitted anything, you still have time. Also, this Friday, there's an Excellence in Online Protection Awards for the Institute of the International Policing and Public Protection Research Institute, IPPPRI. Is this Friday, and as I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, the call for nominations for RIPE DNS Working Group chairs is the 23rd of this month, so you've got a couple of weeks to think about that. In terms of things coming up, there's the next in the series of ICANN sort of ISP training or the DNS related training. This one on DNS related threats on Thursday of this week, which is an online webinar. I think they're about 90 minutes. So that may be of interest to some people. And then back end of this month, you'll see we got the annual RSA conference in San Francisco, which I mentioned that just I'll be going to that. So if anyone finds themselves in San Francisco that week, do let me know. It'd be good to meet up in person if you happen to be there. Always a very interesting event, the annual RSA conference. And I think that's probably it from me. Yeah, just a reminder, next week we're going to be talking some more about NIS2 research, including stuff on know your customer, and also on sort of some of the progress with transposition of the directive into national legislation across the European Union. So and that's with our friends from the DNS Research Federation. I think Emily Taylor will be doing that, I believe, but we'll sort of find out next Monday. So that is everything from me. I'll say thank you to the DNS OARC team for sponsoring this call, which is, as always, much appreciated. But let me pause there. We got just remaining 5 minutes. So I'll stop sharing. and check if there's anything that anyone wants to just mention whilst we're on the call. And if so, now's a great time to jump in and do so. Either pop it in the chat, or better still, unmute and talk, whichever's your preference. I'll give it a couple of seconds as always. I can't see anyone typing, but give you a second or two just in case someone's fumbling for the microphone. Actually, what I might do, Simon, just to put you on the spot, if you don't mind, I know we talked last Monday about the very sad news that our good friend Nigel Hickson had passed away the previous Sunday, well known in the internet governance community, in the IGF, in ICANN, in the ITU, amongst many other places. I think he's got the funeral service is arranged shortly. Is there a public memorial book that's available?
The answer is I don't know.
You would have to know that, but you might know that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can see my phone going. I'm always a bit unsure about Zoom because I have to operate it through a web browser on my web machine. Yes. As far as I know, the answer is no. However, we are compiling one from DCIT. So if anybody wants to contact me direct with a message, I can get it included in that. I'm not sure there is one. I don't think I've seen anything on the ICANN webpage, although I haven't looked recently. But we are compiling one, so people are welcome to identify themselves, and we will include them in ours. I'm afraid you'll have to have our name on the front, but all the messages will be rendered as provided inside.
Fantastic. Are you happy for me to share your email address?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
all right,
okay.
I'll share that afterwards because a few people had asked me. So I don't, like you, I hadn't seen anything from ICANN or elsewhere, so I thought I'd ask just in case. But no, that's kind. If you're happy to do that, then no, I think there will be a few people that would like to do so.
Please forward them to me, and I'll pass them on to the two people who are handling that internally.
Surely. Thank you. Right. Well, on that somber note, I hope you found the discussion today of interest. As I say, I will share the link to the relevant email in case you have an opinion between now and end of tomorrow that you want to share with the DELEG co-chairs. But thank you in particular. I know it was a discussion rather than a presentation, but thank you to Ralph and Tim and Willem and Tal for your input. Hope people found that useful. Have a fantastic week, and look forward to catching up this time next week to talk about progress with NIST 2. So look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks everyone. Have a great week. Bye.